Perfect. I believe it's recording.
All right, excellent. And then I figure we'll just, because I wrote down my answers to the prompts, and we'll just go through it the way that she structured the questions. Does that sound good for you?
Perfect. I have it all printed out where I'll just write down the right answers.
All right, excellent. So I'll pull up if I had planned ahead, I would have it open right now, but let's see. I've got my options here. Zimmerman Group Project. All right, there we are. And I'm going to pull this over here so I can see your sweet face and talk to you at the same time while I see the notes. All right, success. So just for reference, let's see. So I'm going to start at the researcher's position to topic and work down through the prompts. Does that work for you?
That works perfectly.
All right. So anywho, when I was reading it, the researcher's position to the topic, in the lit review at the beginning, it seems like they're suggesting the increases in media viewing under age 2 may decrease ability or increase likelihood of attention disorders, or at least that's how it came across to me. What did you pull from that?
I pulled the same thing. They were very anti-baby videos.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much it. That's their whole stance is don't let your baby watch videos.
Right. And then let's see the next prompt down there. Do you agree with them, or do you have other theories about media viewing and language development? Personally, for me, I agree on some level because the American Academy of Pediatrics put out a guideline. Actually, they put out a guideline every year now. The most recent one in 2019 was saying that media or screen time should be avoided for children under the age of 18 months other than for video chats, like, with grandparents and things. Yeah. So in that sense, I did agree with their position because I'm like, all right, American Academy of Pediatrics, they're looking at it from a scientific perspective. And being a research degree, I'm always going to lean towards that, and also not having kids of my own, so I don't have a practical application to compare it to. But how about yourself?
What do you think? Because I have a little guy who's 18 months with Down syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
So he's like just on that cusp, but he literally will watch like 45-ish minutes when we're like trying to show him a new sign.
Mm-hmm.
And like getting him to sign is sometimes easier if that screen is in front of him and he's like really like
locked into it. Yeah. Well, and that's kind of something that going into the sample groups, just hopping down, or just because you mentioned Down syndrome, where they said that any child with any type of learning challenge or disability was excluded, and that's immediately what I thought about. Well, there's some kids where, depending on what they may have, sometimes having that visual engagement that's separate from a person's face can be more effective. Like, for example, to use the example of children with autism, you know what I mean? They're not so great at reading facial expressions, but maybe if they see like the cartoon version or like a very basic, limited but bright color scale, they might be able to latch onto that more.
Well, with autism, they even teach kids, and even Down syndrome, they teach kids with communication boards where they have to point, which a lot of times now that's an iPad that they get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that kind of negates the study, but the study was very biased in my opinion.
I agree. Yep.
Do we want to move on to question 2 before we get to question 3?
Yes, I think that's a good idea. So what were the author's research questions? I feel like I've been leading this discussion too much. I'll let you go on this one. What did you think of? Because I thought it was kind of wedged in there instead of being very clear like it usually is, but it was definitely...
I was not a fan of this research. I would never quote this study.
Me neither.
I felt like their main goal, their main question was, does baby TV affect communication?
Yeah, and that's pretty much what I got off of it, because I think because I'm used to research studies that have very clearly outlined research questions, and like, these are the questions that are guiding the study, and in this it was just kind of in there. And the only thing that I could find, which is pretty much what you just paraphrased, and this I lifted directly from the study, was association of early viewing with language development in cross-sectional sample of children aged 8 to 24 months old. and then, the variables and adjusting for confounding elements. And I think that, yeah, that's all I could get from it too. Cause I was like, okay, research question, easy. Let's find the section that says our research was led by this, this, and this, but it's not in there. So I agree with you on that. I think that that's pretty much what they were focusing on, and it wasn't very detailed, which bothered me.
Yes, no, they had very lacking details. The way that they asked their questions bothered me.
Yeah,
Because parents are going to lie and lie some more about their kids' ability.
exactly. And that was going to the sample group thing. Well, actually, I keep jumping ahead. I'm sorry. We'll get to that in the tools and scales, because the survey was immediately what I was thinking about. I'm like, well, that's self-reported by the parents, and you have no observation, so you have no way of knowing if what they're reporting is accurate, or if they have some desire to look like it more, quote unquote, whatever better parent, or their child being more capable child,
Yeah.
So I'm with you on that. That bothered me as well. So on the sample group, what sample did they use to answer their research question? Again, it seemed very unclear, and I did not like that at all. For me, it was households with children 2 years younger, which they based off of birth certificates located in Minnesota and Washington, because they were able to find the birth date on the birth certificate, where parents were fluent in English, possessed a working phone number. Only one child per house was selected to participate, and children with intellectual disabilities or any type of emotional or capability variation were not included in the study.
Yes. Did you pick up on when they asked what ethnicity the family was, and they gave Hispanic or white?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, there's like a serious lacking right there.
Yeah, range, guys. There's way more variability than that. Well, and that was the other thing that bothered me too in that study, is that they said that they asked in the survey for the parents to relay the ethnicity and the race of the child, but then nowhere in the study do they actually specify
The race.
the demographic of their study sample. And it's just, and all they did is say that it was the sample had a much higher household income level and higher level of education than what was average in the communities that they pulled them from. But they never tell you what those they had it in the survey, but then they don't tell you any of the answers to those questions. And it's kind of like, what am I supposed to do with this? Like, good job, I guess, creating a survey.
With all of this bias, I'm honestly surprised it made it past its peer review and made it into an academic journal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it bothered me too, because I really like research. I like details.
Yeah.
And I think it's so important in research that we critically assess, inherent biases that the researchers might have, biases that might be arising from the sample, what those limited samples might represent in the results of the study. And yeah, I'm right there with you on that. I was like, this is just, you're not giving me many details. You're not telling me what the details are. You're alluding to things, but you're not ever actually breaking it down for me. Like, it really bothered me, the structure of the paper, because they didn't have a demographic section either. Like, and I couldn't even find how many households were in the study. I mean, I don't know if you could either, but
I could not.
Yeah. So
it was just a bunch of percentages, and then the CDI scores.
Right. And it's like, statistics can, unless you know the demographics and the amounts of people, the stats are almost meaningless, because it's like, okay, well, great. It's a percentage of what,
Yeah.
So, because if it's like 14 kids, it might be so small that it's like, this is not a representative sample, because it's so little that we can't, derive anything meaningful from it. So
I think they did at one time say they had a large sample size. So large is a very relative term.
Right, exactly. Well, and with research especially, yeah, because like large could be more than 100, large could be more than 600. And I think that when you're looking at, especially with children, or actually in any group, if we're saying 16% of 100, that might be just by chance of the group that you've selected. When you're saying 16% of 600, then that 16% becomes a lot more valid.
Yes.
So,
do you want to move on to the next question?
Um, sure. I just want to touch on one part where it said
Yeah.
if they chose a different sample. Another thing that bothered me going back to the demographics is that children they required the fluency in English in the household.
Yes.
And I feel like children from non-fluent English-speaking households may benefit in performance tests from children's DVDs that have linguistic content simply because the DVD would perhaps provide like a larger vocabulary in English than
Yes.
perhaps their parents could, because I'm assuming the CDI is probably administered in English.
Yes.
So, I mean, that might be something to look at too, because like I think that shifts things. And also too, they were saying that, it's a higher income level than average. Well, I think that lower income households may utilize child development DVDs differently than higher income households, and that could generate different results. Like, for example, they might use them more, they might use them less. And, that could change how that affects the children too, because by having that limited sample where it's like the sliver of our socioeconomic demographic, you're really kind of making it hard to feel like these results are valid,
Yes.
in my opinion. So,
Uh,
all right, tools and scales. You want to hop down to that? Or
yes. So right now we have no observations from the um, interviewers.
Yep.
The other thing I had a huge issue with was that parents are not skilled to look at children's behavior. Well, most parents are not skilled to look at their children's behavior. And if they
Right,
are skilled, they are extremely biased.
right. Well, and also, yeah, because it's like, unless you have a lot of it, like maybe someone who's a preschool teacher would be able to look objectively at their child's behavior. But the vast majority of people that maybe have or people that have a very large family, maybe they've had 6 to 10 children that they've raised, so they can see variation. But I think, yeah, if you have 1 or 2 kids, whatever your kids do is going to be normative to you.
Yes.
So, I agree with you wholeheartedly on that. And going back to what we touched on earlier, the self-reported survey over the phone really bothered me for exactly the same reasons that you said before. Is it's like, I think that there's such a toxic culture around parenting, especially in the United States, where there's a consideration of a right way and a wrong way to do things. People are going to feel like maybe they should modify reality to a desired answer to appear to meet this, societally constructed standard better, whether or not it's accurate.
Yes, I will agree with that. When they asked how often the parents read to their child, I'm like, those parents are going to lie, so that way they do not feel judged.
Yep, exactly. I think that was really unfair of the researchers to do that, because you're kind of placing the parents in a position where they're just trying to look like they're doing a good job, and they're going to modify. And going back to what you were saying too, that self-reported survey, most parents aren't skilled in critically observing their children. They're just going to have that extreme bias because it's their child. I mean, obviously we all would. And then also too, yeah, like whatever their kid does is normal to them, so they're not going to notice in the same way that a researcher who has an academic background in this environment is going to notice.
I also think it's important to note that a lot of kids spend 40 hours in daycare, and their parents are not going to know every single word that kid knows, especially if at school they're fed quinoa and at home their parents have no idea what quinoa is.
Right, exactly. It's that difference in environment. It's like, and also just, the difference in people taking care of them. Because I think the more people that your kid experiences as caretakers that are capable individuals, the better. But just like you said, it's like, I don't know if they like taught them, like when I was little, the gal that took care of me was Taiwanese. So like I knew words in Taiwanese that my parents didn't know because she taught me how to say them. It's that exact thing. So I agree with you. I think that there's a falseness that the researchers almost built into this, because there's no way, even if a parent wanted to be accurate in their responses, especially like you said, if they have childcare of any kind, unless this parent is a stay-at-home parent who literally stays at home with their kid all the time, there is no way for them to necessarily know, because they're going to be, like you said, in environments where they're going to be exposed to different things, and that parent's not going to know. Like, however innocuous it is, like I think the quinoa thing is an excellent example. Like, how does one know? But
They did ask, one of their questions was how long your child spent in childcare, but we
mhm.
never got the demographics for that.
Right, that's what bothered me as well. Yeah. It's like, well, did they spend time in childcare? Well, how much? Okay, cool. And that's, but yeah, you never hear about it. And that's what bothers me too, is like the other questions in that survey, like parental presence, like is one parent present? Are both parent present? Never talked about in the results. Um, ethnicity and race of child, again, mentioned that they surveyed it, but they didn't like there's so much in the survey that they allude to and then exclude for some reason, and it just seems disingenuous to me. It's like, what is the possible benefit of editing out this information?
Yeah. Yeah. It felt very like they were forcing their issues with child DVDs in order to get the results that they wanted.
Yep.
It's just
Hmm.
bad science.
Right, we're going to leave these things out because we don't like them. And the other thing that bugged me too is like they mention using linear regression, which is a way of doing a graph in statistics to
Yeah.
show the connection between your independent and your dependent variable, but they never show you any graphs about those regressions at all. And it's like, what's the point of doing a qualitative and quantitative analysis, and saying that we're doing all this additional work to do a linear regression and then not include any information about what that regression looks like?
Yeah.
I mean, I get it if it's for a magazine or like layman reading, because most people are not going to have a tremendous amount of interest. But if you know that you're submitting it to an academic journal, if you know that the research that you're going to have read is by people that are going to understand what a linear regression is,
You should put it.
right? There's no like that really bugged me, because doing a regression on a data set isn't necessarily the easiest thing in the world. It's like, why would you do that to yourself if you're not going to include it unless your regression doesn't support
You're in.
what? Right, yeah, because that's kind of what bothered me, is it's like you said, like bad science. Instead of putting forward the research question and going, okay, here's what we want to find out, here's what the data said, based on the data, here's our analysis and our results and our recommendations for future research. Because this was just like, it's almost like when someone goes into a lit review and they have a lit review question, and instead of reporting on what the research says, they try and find research that supports the answer they want to find.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's kind of what happened here, because yeah, there's so many glaring gaps just based on like what tools and scales they use. Because it's like, great, the tools and scales you use, the research design itself sounds pretty solid, but
Yeah.
then the write-up of it is like one half of the details that it should include, and that bothered me. It was like, you can't critically assess it because you don't have the proper information to do so. You just kind of are forced to agree with them because you're assuming that they're relaying to you the information, but you yourself never actually get it. So yeah, bothered me, which kind of lead me into the critical analysis element. Questions that come up for you about the analysis they conducted or what they found. I think you and I probably pretty much went over that. It's like they didn't include the results. So that's my issue, is like, how do we have any faith in your conclusions or your discussion or your results if you're not even showing us one half of what the results should be based on the research design that you put forward?
I'm really interested in why they limited their population or population sample. Don't know the difference too well, but why they limited that so greatly when they
Mm-hmm.
could have opened it up and had more people answer the phone for them if they allowed it.
Well, right. And I'm kind of there with you on that, because it's like, if you have enough funding to get what one would consider a large sample set, I mean, I get it if it's a small sample and they're like, our limitations are that we didn't have much funding and so we could only find 50 people for it. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But this supposedly is a large sample size, so you'd assume that they have the resources, the resources to be able to get a representative sample. And I'm with you, it doesn't make any sense. Why would you not want a community representative sample if you're trying to prove something that affects anyone with a child, which is not, restricted to a certain demographic or ethnicity? It's that everybody has kids, well, within reason. Everyone could have kids barring certain situations, but it's not limited to this environment that you've created to analyze it in.
I also don't like that they stopped it at one point in time. So they didn't go back and say, okay, after 3 or 4 months of watching videos, did this child improve or not improve? Like the kid could just be delayed in speech.
Right. And it has nothing to do with the DVD exposure. It's just something within that child's individual development. I agree with you. And I think that that's a huge issue that I found with this in general, is that it totally ignores, it assumes that all children are following a normative developmental pattern, and there's no unique developmental pace for anyone, and that we should all be on this perfectly charted way of progressing, which, I mean, to a certain extent, yes, okay, you can expect different things from different ages to a degree, but it's not like we're not robots. We don't automatically develop these ways. And like you were saying too, just because they have less verbal vocabulary ability when they're in a certain range does not mean that they then don't just shoot forward in ability and then catch up with everyone else, or maybe even exceed the other kids in their class, in their range. It's like that classic late bloomer thing. Like the kid just might, like, there's some kids that have no delays developmentally at all, and they just choose not to speak until they're 3 or 4 years old, and then by the time they speak, they're speaking full sentences. So that bothered me too. It's too much of an assumption, and pardon me. But the conclusions.
So sorry. The study did point out that one of the reasons that the DVDs may cause a lower CDI score was because parents were utilizing them for their kids who were delayed in speech.
Yeah, I remember reading that part as well. Yeah, so it's that going back to that correlation causation thing.
Yes, they should have asked some sort of follow-up question, like, hey, is your child delayed in any developmental pathways? Which they never asked besides, does your child have a disability?
Right, which then immediately barred them from the research study anyway. And I think that was a poor way to assume, well, we've taken any child with a developmental delay or any type of disability or variable from a normative development pattern, so then we can assume that they're developing on this very strict track. And that's not the case,
Yeah.
So there's a lot that bothered me in this research paper, for sure. And then moving to conclusions of research, again, it seems really convoluted. I mean, the main thing that I drew from it, I like data points a lot. So like, I'll tend to like look for the actual thing that they're like, this is the results. I'm like, okay, cool. And the only thing I could find from that was that DVD viewing for children under 16 months was associated with decreased or slow vocabulary development in a linear way, which they don't clarify, which might be part of their linear regression, which they don't include in the research paper. But it doesn't affect itself in children 17 to 24 months, meaning the negative impact or delay generated in younger children might be transient. So to me, that sentence was like, so you basically found nothing by saying that. Like, it's associated with the delay up to a certain point that may disappear by the time they're in the level 2 of the CDI assessment. And it's like,
yes, because parents who let their kids watch DVDs, they're not going to start when they're 17 months old. These people started when they were like 6 months old. Like, they bought into the entire program. And so the results, while they're forced to make you believe that they're correct, are not really correct.
Right. And that kind of leads me to how might we use these results in the real world, especially considering, like, and she referenced like the part of the first chapter of her textbook that's causation versus correlation, if you're on the page it's on. But I didn't even go that far. I said, honestly, I would feel uncomfortable attempting to apply these findings in a real world setting until we could replicate the results with a larger more representative population within the geographic region that they're doing the study, because the unclearly defined sample demographics make it almost impossible to stand behind the validity of the research design. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it sounds good. We don't know. You didn't include anything with it. So, yeah, because they're seeming to, by limiting their population, by limiting what they choose to include in their results, it's like, okay, great. Like, I don't have any faith in your results. Like, you sound like you created a good research design, but you don't include even half of what you said you studied. So how do we even know what's correlation versus causation at this point? Because you don't give us enough of the results for us to even understand.
Yeah. Based on the results, just to answer Toby's question, based on the results, I would say this is more correlation than causation than anything else.
Yep.
So, do you have anything else to add?
I don't know. I think we covered all the talk points. I think that we discussed everything we needed to discuss. I think we covered everything, in my opinion. There's nothing else I would like to include. Is there anything that you feel like you want to touch on before we stop recording this discussion?
I don't think so.
Right.
I think we did everything great.
Checkmate.
Okay, I'm going to stop recording.
Okay.